Really excited today to be joined by one of our hemp heroes in Congress, Representative Ed Perlmutter from Colorado. Representative Perlmutter has been a champion on all things hemp and cannabis for his term in office. His term, which is going to be expiring soon as he announced his retirement at the end of the year. But as the congressman and I were talking before this podcast, we want to give him a retirement party and a president, and that president hopefully will be passage of the Safe Banking Act, which we'll talk about in a second. But Congressman, welcome to the podcast.
Jonathan, thanks for having me on your show. I really appreciate it. And you and I've, we've had a couple interviews concerning hemp and cannabis and a variety of things. So I'm glad you keep including me. Thank you.
Well, we appreciate you participating, and we definitely will miss you next year. But let's talk about safe banking, and we do have a pretty sophisticated listening audience who most of them, I'm sure, have heard of safe banking. But if you could again kind of share the story about what the problem is and how this legislation addresses that problem.
Sure. So safe banking is a bill to provide a safe harbor for financial institutions, primarily banks, credit unions, but lawyers, accountants, real estate companies, insurance companies, to do business with the cannabis industry, with those that service the cannabis industry. That's the guts of it. And I was asked to kind of carry this legislation back in 2012, 2013, just after Colorado by initiative legalized marijuana in our state. And then Washington was right on our heels with respect to that. And so Barney Frank at the time saw that there was going to be a collision between state laws and the federal laws under the Controlled Substance Act, and that dispensaries and other kinds of organizations would just get a ton of cash, and that was going to lead to public safety problems. So the guts of it is businesses that are legal in a particular state ought to have legitimate financial services, whether it's insurance, banking, payroll accounts, credit cards, checking, whatever it may be. And we've been working on it now for quite a while, managed to pass the bill. And it's got a hemp component to it as well, related to credit cards. We've managed to pass the bill out of the House 7 times now, most recently as part of the National Defense Authorization Act a week or so ago, to the Senate with big bipartisan support. So virtually every Democrat and more than 100 Republicans, but it's been going to the Senate and just sitting under the Republicans last cycle, where Senator Crapo more or less said the bill was too big and too broad for them to take up. Then the Democrats take the majority, just barely, with 50-50 plus Kamala Harris as the tiebreaker. And now the bill is too limited and too narrow. The Democrats wanting a much bigger, broader legalization bill.
You can't buy a break, can you?
Well, somewhere I think I'm in the sweet spot if they'd all just sit down and take a look at it. And I think they will. Cory Booker and Chuck Schumer just put out this big bill. And I think it's a good bill, but they don't have the votes. So now they're going to have to get realistic, and I think they will.
Let's talk about, you mentioned the hemp provisions, and you mentioned Republicans, and you're sitting on recess in Denver, Colorado. I'm in my home in Lexington, Kentucky, where my Congressman, Andy Barr, a Republican, worked with you on the hemp provisions. And if you could kind of share, what this does specifically for hemp.
So Andy and I serve on the Financial Services Committee together. We've been friends for a long time, and sometimes our politics align and sometimes they don't, but we're friends. And as I was bringing safe banking up, I was looking for Republican, co-sponsors, assistance, if I could get it. And Andy said, look, really not crazy about this, but we've had a problem in Kentucky, even though hemp has been authorized under the agricultural bill of whatever that was, 2017 or whatever. There'd been some trouble with financial services, particularly around credit cards. So he and I sat down to work out language that would be beneficial to the hemp industry as well as the cannabis industry to make sure that the credit card companies were comfortable in providing credit card services. And as a consequence, Andy Barr and I, Andy more or less has a big section of the safe banking bill, really designed to help the hemp industry, but overall it provides financial services to both the cannabis industry or credit card services to the financial services, or helps the financial services industry provide these credit card services to cannabis and to hemp.
So a lot of our listeners, when we think of Washington today, we think of real strict partisanship. Right now, as we are recording, the latest thing on the docket is a Inflation Reduction Act, a clean energy bill that every Democrat in the Senate supported and every Republican opposed. But the Safe Banking Act has been unusually bipartisan, and not only Andy Barr, but I believe 100 of your Republican colleagues in the House supported this. What do you credit that to? How have you been able to make this a bipartisan issue?
Well, I have had excellent Republican co-sponsors, starting with Steve Stivers and Andy Steve Stivers out of Ohio. He retired. Now David Joyce out of Ohio has been a big help to me, and Warren Davidson, another Ohioan, who are supportive of the bill. David more from a business standpoint, Warren more from a libertarian standpoint, but whatever gets them interested. And then in committee, I worked with a number of Republicans, starting with Andy, to craft the bill in a way that made sense to them. And so, unlike some of the big bills that we get, the one you just mentioned, the Inflation Reduction Act, where it's very, Democrats are voting yes and Republicans are voting no, this one was built by both parties, if you will. And the more we work together, the better the bill has gotten, no question about it. There was a section in there dealing with cartels that Scott Tipton put in. There's a section in there dealing with what's called in the financial world Operation Choke Point that Blaine Luetkemeyer put in. But I gained votes, but I gained provisions that made the bill better, in my opinion, and I think in theirs. And in the Senate, we've got some good sponsors, Democrats and Republican, starting with Jeff Merkley from Oregon, a Democrat, and Steve Daines, a Republican from Montana. So this thing we've been moving it forward in a way that both sides are, working together to add some things, to modify some things. It's a lot more fun as a legislator to do something like that than to constantly, butt heads.
Yeah, it's been my experience with this issue on the hemp side has been just the same. I'm a former statewide elected official in Kentucky, a proud liberal Democrat. I was the chairman of the Democratic Party, but the people that I've been working with on these issues are Mitch McConnell and Rand Paul and Andy Barr and Jamie Comer, who's the ranking member of House Oversight. I mean, these are all pretty conservative Republicans, but we seem to come to one accord on at least this issue.
Well, I think everybody comes at different issues from different perspectives. And like I said, just within the Republican Party, you kind of have the business approach that, say, a Steve Stivers or an Andy Barr or David Joyce bring, and then you might have a libertarian approach that a Warren Davidson brings. Same thing on the Democratic side. There's a business group. I'm part of the new Dems. We're more business focused, but some are coming at it from a criminal justice point of view, from an access to capital point of view for all businesses, big and small, but particularly minority and small business, veteran-based kinds of businesses. And so, if you can find common ground among people's different perspectives, you can build a pretty good piece of legislation.
So let's talk about what we're going to do in the Senate, because as you mentioned earlier, this has been passed by the House 7 times, and 7 times it's been rejected by the Senate. Initially, it was Republicans that didn't want to do anything cannabis related. Now it was Democrats who want to do everything cannabis, don't want to just do something limited. But now that the Schumer, Booker, Wyden bill has been introduced and will likely not get 60 votes, at least this year, do you see a pathway now before the end of the year, before you hang up your cleats for the last time, to get the 60 votes that are needed over in the Senate to get this passed?
Yes, and I've got about 5 months left in my term. And I had a conversation today with Steve Daines, Republican senator from Montana, about how he saw things moving forward in the Senate. I met with Jeff Merkley a week ago, who is the Democratic prime sponsor, and Steve is the Republican prime sponsor, and both of them were pretty optimistic, which for senators is unusual. You know, that's not a very optimistic bunch over there. They have the weight of the world on their shoulders. So that was encouraging. I think the fact that Schumer, Booker, and Wyden were able to unveil what is really a good piece of legislation in terms of their Cannabis Innovation Act, I think that will allow things now to start moving forward, because they've shown that they can put together a good piece of legislation. Now they've got to get realistic and determine whether they've got the votes for that, and they probably don't. So then what happens? I think safe banking becomes sort of the centerpiece for a potentially bigger bill, but the bigger you make it, the potential for losing votes comes. So there'd probably be a research component to the bill. There probably would be a veterans PTSD component to the bill, probably some kind of expungement. And by that, I mean some funding for local district attorneys, state's attorneys, to go back through their own records and clean them up. And if they so choose on a local basis, expunge people from the records who just had minor infractions. But those minor infractions can make it very hard for an individual to go to work in the hemp industry, in the cannabis industry, in the banking industry with the federal government. So we can, make sure that there is some social equity component here too, but leave that to local authorities, but give them some assistance in cleaning up their records.
Yeah. Now, some on the left have criticized the Safe Banking Act on its own as just going to enrich bankers and not help minorities, particularly folks who've been disproportionately the subject of criminal justice actions. Now, the Minority Cannabis Business Association strongly supports your bill, supports
Yes.
safe banking. So can you help explain why this is not about big banks, but rather this is about small businesses and minority-owned businesses?
Yes, it really is about small banks, small credit unions helping small businesses, minority, women-owned, veteran-owned businesses, and to help these smaller organizations. So safe banking allows, instead of the smaller businesses, the minority-owned businesses, to have to sell out because they can't get access to capital. At the end of the day, you're looking for loans, and maybe JP Morgan Chase makes a loan to some big outfit, but they're unlikely to advance money directly to a small dispensary or a nursery business or operation. So I think that, and what we've had, the testimony from the minority cannabis business owners has been fantastic in that regard, how providing some minimal banking services will allow the minorities and women particularly to develop these businesses, to grow these businesses, and to have the opportunity to succeed, which they say they don't have right now. And so they've been very great witnesses to both the House as well as to the Senate. And, we need to get this access to capital to these folks so that they have a chance and don't have to either sell out the testimony about some of the small businesses in Washington, D.C. that have tried to open, but have not, and have had licenses, really were well equipped, but they could not get access to capital. And this will help them do that.
Okay, so final question. after Labor Day, the US Hemp Roundtable is going to do a social media and email blitz, and encouraging our followers, our tens of thousands of hemp supporters, to give Ed Perlmutter a retirement present by getting this bill passed. And I want to use a video of what you're about to say with this. So can you help instruct folks? I mean, we've got it set up so it sends an email to their members of Congress. What should they tell their members of Congress? What is the message that you think that they should share to get this over the top?
Please have your members call their senators and ask them to pass safe banking to help both small businesses, minority businesses, women-owned businesses get access to capital, but also to help with public safety, where we know that there have been a lot of robberies. We've had some murders recently up in the state of Washington. We've had those in Colorado. So from a public safety standpoint and an access to capital standpoint, we need to get safe banking and other things passed. And the Senate can get that done this year and needs to get it done this year.
All right, folks, let's do it for Perlmutter. Let's get this bill passed. And thank you so much, Congressman, for joining me, but more, thank you for your leadership on this important issue and on everything you've done in Washington over the last few decades.
Thanks, Jonathan. And I know 7 times the charm. This is the 7th time we're going to get it done. Thank you very much.